The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood by her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the roses she had planted years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal seemed heavier than usual, and the words inside had shattered her world in ways she never thought possible. Prince William was scheduled to depart for a humanitarian mission that would take him to the most dangerous regions of war-torn countries. What the public didn't know was that this wasn't just any mission. Intelligence reports had revealed credible threats against his life, and the palace had made the difficult decision that he must go alone, without his usual security detail, to avoid drawing attention to the relief efforts. Catherine sank into the antique chair by her dressing table, her reflection showing the weight of sleepless nights and worry lines that hadn't been there a month ago. The children were still sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware that their father might not return from this journey. George had been asking about their upcoming family trip to Scotland, and Charlotte had been practicing a piano piece she wanted to play for Daddy when he came home from his meetings. The couple had always known that duty would sometimes demand sacrifices, but this felt different. William had tried to shield her from the full details, but Catherine had overheard enough conversations between him and his security team to understand the gravity of the situation. The mission involved delivering aid to orphaned children in regions where kidnapping and violence against Western officials had become commonplace. As she prepared for what might be their last breakfast together, Catherine made a promise to herself. She would not let William see her fear. She would not burden him with her tears or desperate pleas for him to refuse the mission. This was bigger than their family, bigger than their love, and she understood the weight of the crown they both carried. But understanding didn't make the pain any less sharp. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, their usual morning chatter subdued. Even they seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. Mrs. Henderson, the children's nanny, had noticed Catherine's red-rimmed eyes and had wordlessly prepared an extra strong cup of tea, placing it by her bedside with a gentle squeeze of her shoulder. William was already in his study, reviewing mission briefings and making last-minute calls to charity organizations. Catherine could hear the low murmur of his voice through the thick wooden doors, discussing logistics and safety protocols. She knew he was being briefed on scenarios she couldn't bear to imagine, contingency plans for outcomes that would leave their children without a father and her without the man who had been her anchor for over a decade. The weight of maintaining royal composure had never felt more crushing. Soon she would need to put on a brave face, smile for the cameras, and wave goodbye as if this were just another royal engagement. The world would see a poised duchess sending off her husband with dignity and grace. They would never know about the silent sobs that had racked her body in the early hours of the morning, or the way she had memorized every detail of his face while he slept, terrified it might be the last time. Catherine touched the simple gold band on her finger, remembering their wedding day and the vows they had spoken before millions of viewers worldwide. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, in times of joy and in times of unimaginable fear, she had meant every word then, and she meant them now, even as her heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces that no royal protocol could ever put back together. The breakfast room felt unusually quiet as the family gathered around the mahogany table that had witnessed countless royal meals throughout generations. George buttered his toast with the focused concentration only a child could muster, while Charlotte hummed softly as she stirred honey into her porridge. Louis, still in his pajamas, reached for his father's hand across the table, completely unaware that this simple gesture was breaking both his parents' hearts. William maintained his usual morning routine, reading snippets from newspapers and asking the children about their plans for the day. His voice carried its familiar warmth, but Catherine noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed silently against his coffee cup. She had learned to read these subtle signs over their years together, understanding the man behind the prince in ways the world would never see. The children chattered about their upcoming school projects and weekend plans, their innocent voices filling the space that grief and fear threatened to claim. Charlotte announced that she had written a story about brave knights for her English class, and George shared his excitement about the football match he would play that afternoon. Louis simply smiled and offered everyone bites of his jam-covered toast, his generous spirit unchanged by the weight of the crown he would someday inherit. Catherine forced herself to engage, asking questions and offering encouragement. But every word felt like it might be the last she would speak to her children with their father present. She watched William's eyes soften as he listened to their stories, saw how he committed every detail to memory, and knew he was thinking the same thoughts that tormented her. These precious, ordinary moments had suddenly become treasures more valuable than any crown jewel. After breakfast, William announced that he needed to attend some important meetings, his euphemism for the final security briefings that would prepare him for the mission ahead. The children accepted this explanation without question, accustomed to their father's demanding schedule. They hugged him goodbye with the casual affection of children who trusted that Daddy would always come home for dinner. Their faith in his invincibility both heartbreaking and beautiful. Catherine walked with William to his study, their fingers intertwined in a grip neither wanted to release. The hallway seemed longer than usual, each step taking them closer to a goodbye they weren't ready to face. The portraits of previous monarchs watched from gilded frames, silent witnesses to generations of sacrifice and duty that had shaped their family's destiny. In the privacy of his study, away from servants and children and the weight of public expectation, William finally allowed his composure to crack. He pulled Catherine into his arms with a desperation that spoke volumes about his own fears, his own understanding of what this mission might cost them. They stood there in silence, hearts beating against each other, trying to memorize the feeling of being whole. The mission briefings had been more sobering than William had initially let on. The humanitarian crisis in the region was worse than public reports indicated, and the political situation had deteriorated rapidly in recent weeks. Several aid workers had gone missing, and intelligence suggested that William's presence, while crucial for drawing international attention to the crisis, would also make him a high-value target for extremist groups looking to make a political statement. Catherine felt the tremor in his hands as he held her, and realized that her strong, unshakable husband was just as terrified as she was. This knowledge somehow made her love him even more, even as it amplified her own terror. He wasn't invincible, despite what the children believed, despite what the public needed him to be. He was simply a man who loved his family, and felt called to use his position to help those who had no voice, no power, no hope. The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted their embrace, a harsh reminder that duty was calling and time was running short. William reluctantly pulled away, his hands framing Catherine's face as he looked into her eyes with an intensity that felt like a final blessing and a desperate prayer all at once. The afternoon sun filtered through the study windows as Catherine sat in William's leather chair, surrounded by maps and documents he had left behind. She traced the route he would take with her finger, following the red lines that marked dangerous territories and refugee camps, where he would spend the next several weeks. Each location had been marked with statistics that painted a grim picture of human suffering, numbers that represented real families torn apart by war and violence. The palace staff had begun their discreet preparations for William's departure, though the true nature of his mission remained classified. To the outside world, this would appear as another routine royal engagement, carefully choreographed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Catherine understood the importance of this facade, but it felt cruel to pretend that everything was fine when her world was about to be turned upside down. She found herself thinking about the early days of their marriage, when William's military service had meant shorter separations and clearly defined dangers. This felt different, more uncertain, with variables that even the best security teams couldn't fully control. The regions he would visit had been devastated by years of conflict, where desperation had made people capable of unthinkable acts, and where a British prince would represent both hope and a valuable political prize. The children returned from their afternoon activities, their faces flushed with excitement from their various pursuits. George had scored 2 goals in his football match, Charlotte had received praise for her creative writing, and Louis had successfully completed a challenging puzzle. Their joy was infectious and heartbreaking simultaneously, reminding Catherine of all the moments William might miss in the coming weeks, all the achievements he might not be there to celebrate. During afternoon tea, she found herself studying their faces with new intensity, trying to imagine how she would explain their father's absence if the unthinkable happened. How do you tell a child that their parent died trying to help strangers? How do you make them understand that love sometimes demands the ultimate sacrifice? These questions haunted her as she listened to their chatter about weekend plans and upcoming school events. William joined them for tea, though his phone buzzed constantly with updates from his security team and final confirmations from the humanitarian organizations he would be working with. He answered the children's questions about his upcoming trip with carefully rehearsed responses, telling them he would bring back stories about brave people and maybe some small gifts if he found appropriate ones. His ability to sound excited about the journey while knowing its true dangers was both admirable and heartbreaking. As evening approached, the palace began to feel like a stage set for a play no one wanted to perform. Servants moved with unusual efficiency, completing tasks that would ensure the household ran smoothly during William's absence. Catherine noticed Mrs. Henderson discreetly packing extra clothes for the children, preparing for the possibility that their stay with their grandparents might be extended if circumstances changed. The formal dinner that night carried an air of ceremony that felt more like a memorial than a farewell meal. The children had been allowed to stay up past their usual bedtime, though they didn't understand the significance of this special treatment. They ate their favorite foods and shared stories about their day, their laughter echoing through the dining room in ways that seemed to highlight the emptiness that would soon follow. Catherine watched William throughout the meal, memorizing the way he smiled at the children's jokes, the gentle way he helped Louis cut his meat, the pride in his eyes when George recounted his football victory. These were the moments she would cling to in the dark days ahead, the memories that would sustain her faith that he would return to them whole and safe. After dinner, William surprised everyone by suggesting they have a family game night, something they rarely did due to their demanding schedules. They gathered in the sitting room, playing board games and card games until the children's eyelids grew heavy. It was an ordinary evening made extraordinary by the knowledge that it might be their last as a complete family for a very long time, possibly forever. The bedtime routine took on sacred significance that evening as William tucked each child into bed with extra care and attention. He read George an additional chapter from their current adventure book, his voice steady and reassuring as he brought the heroic characters to life. The story was about courage and doing what was right even when it was dangerous, themes that seemed to resonate with their own family's situation in ways that made Catherine's throat tighten with unshed tears. In Charlotte's room, William listened patiently as she played the piano piece she had been practicing for weeks. Her small fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, and when she finished, he applauded as if she had just performed at Carnegie Hall. She beamed with pride and made him promise to hear her play it again when he returned from his trip. The ease with which she said when instead of if reminded both parents of the innocence they were fighting to preserve. Louis, being the youngest, required the most elaborate bedtime ritual. William read 3 different picture books, acted out voices for all the characters, and sang the silly song that always made their youngest giggle with delight. As Louis's eyes finally drooped closed, he mumbled sleepily that he hoped Daddy would have sweet dreams too, completely unaware that his father might not be sleeping in a safe bed for many nights to come. Catherine stood in the doorway of each room, watching William pour love into these final moments with their children. She saw how he lingered over each goodnight kiss, how his hand trembled slightly as he smoothed their hair, how he whispered extra "I love yous" that the children accepted as natural expressions of parental affection. The depth of his devotion to them was both beautiful and tragic, knowing that this same love was what drove him to risk everything for children he had never met. After the children were settled, William and Catherine retreated to their own bedroom, where his packed bags waited by the door like silent harbingers of the separation to come. The sight of his passport and travel documents arranged neatly on the dresser made the departure feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. Tomorrow morning, he would board a plane that would take him thousands of miles away from everything he held dear. They sat together on the edge of their bed, hands clasped tightly, struggling to find words for emotions too vast and complex for language. The palace around them was settling into its nighttime quiet, but their minds raced with all the things they wanted to say, all the promises they wanted to make, all the fears they needed to voice before time ran out. William spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper as he told her how proud he was of her strength, how much he admired her grace under pressure, and how deeply he trusted her to guide their family through whatever lay ahead. He made her promise to take care of herself, not just the children, and to remember that her well-being was crucial to their family's stability. These words carried the weight of a man who understood he might be asking his wife to raise their children alone. Catherine listened with tears she could no longer hold back, understanding that he was giving her permission to be strong enough to survive without him, while hoping desperately that she would never need to use that strength. She told him about her pride in his courage, her admiration for his commitment to helping others, and her absolute faith that he would find a way to return to them. Even as she spoke the words, she wondered if she was giving him false hope or drawing strength from her own desperate need to believe. They talked through the night about practical matters and impossible dreams, about the children's future and their own deepest fears. They discussed contingency plans they hoped would never be needed, and made promises they might not be able to keep. Most importantly, they said "I love you" in every way they could think of, trying to pack a lifetime of devotion into their remaining hours together. As dawn approached, they both knew their time was running out. Soon the palace would wake up, the children would need breakfast, and the carefully orchestrated farewell would begin. But for now, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, they held each other close and pretended that morning would never come, that duty would never call, and that love alone could keep them safe from all the dangers of the world. The morning of departure arrived with cruel efficiency, bringing sunshine that seemed inappropriate for such a dark day. Catherine woke to find William already dressed in his travel clothes, standing by the window and watching the ground staff prepare for what would appear to be a routine royal departure. The palace had been transformed overnight into a stage set, with security personnel positioned discreetly and media crews gathering at the designated viewing areas. The children's breakfast was unusually subdued, though they couldn't quite understand why the atmosphere felt so heavy. George kept glancing between his parents, his developing emotional intelligence picking up on tensions he couldn't name. Charlotte chattered nervously about her upcoming dance recital, asking repeatedly when Daddy would be back to see her perform. Louis simply stayed close to William, climbing into his lap whenever possible and refusing to let go. Catherine forced herself to eat, knowing she would need her strength for the performance ahead. The public farewell would require her to embody the perfect royal wife, gracious and composed, supporting her husband's important work with dignity and pride. No one could see the woman underneath who was dying inside, who had spent the night memorizing the feel of her husband's heartbeat against her chest. The final preparations unfolded with military precision that felt both reassuring and terrifying. William's security team conducted last-minute briefings, their faces professionally neutral despite the gravity of the mission they were discussing. Catherine caught fragments of conversation about communication protocols and emergency procedures, reminders of all the things that could go wrong thousands of miles away from help. Mrs. Henderson appeared to escort the children to their morning activities, a carefully planned distraction that would keep them occupied during the most emotional parts of the farewell. George hugged his father tightly, extracting promises about postcards and phone calls that William readily gave despite not knowing if he would be able to keep them. Charlotte presented him with a drawing she had made that morning, a picture of their family surrounded by hearts and rainbows that she insisted would keep him safe. Louis proved the most difficult to separate from his father, his small arms wrapped around William's neck with the tenacious grip of a child who sensed something was wrong. When he finally allowed Mrs. Henderson to take him, he extracted a promise that Daddy would read him a bedtime story over the phone, a request that brought tears to both his parents' eyes. The simplicity of a child's needs highlighted the complexity of adult responsibilities. The motorcade arrived precisely on schedule, its black vehicles gleaming in the morning sun like symbols of duty that couldn't be avoided or delayed. Catherine watched from the window as William's luggage was loaded efficiently, each bag representing another piece of their life together being temporarily removed. The sight of his passport being checked one final time made her stomach clench with the finality of what was about to happen. In their final private moment before joining the public farewell, William and Catherine stood in the entrance hall where they had shared so many hellos and goodbyes over the years. This time felt different from all the others, weighted with significance that transformed familiar surroundings into something foreign and frightening. The portraits of their ancestors seemed to watch from their gilded frames, silent witnesses to another generation's sacrifice for duty and crown. William reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wrapped package, pressing it into Catherine's hands with instructions not to open it until after he had gone. The gift was small enough to fit in her palm but felt heavier than any crown jewel, carrying with it the weight of love and hope and desperate prayer. She wanted to protest, to unwrap it immediately, but respected his wish for this final gesture to sustain her through the dark hours ahead. Catherine had her own surprise, slipping a folded letter into his breast pocket with a smile that took enormous effort to maintain. Inside were words she had spent hours crafting, expressions of love and faith and encouragement that she hoped would strengthen him when the mission became difficult. She had written about their children's trust in his return, about her own unwavering belief in his courage, and about the life they would build together when he came home. The sound of approaching footsteps announced that their private time was over, and the public performance was about to begin. Palace staff moved into position, security teams conducted final sweeps, and photographers prepared to capture images that would be scrutinized by millions of people around the world. In moments, they would have to transform from frightened spouses into the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, playing roles that demanded perfection when their hearts were breaking. The palace courtyard had been transformed into a carefully orchestrated stage, where personal tragedy would be disguised as routine royal business. Catherine emerged from the palace doors walking beside William, her posture perfect and her smile composed, every inch the supportive royal wife the cameras expected to see. The morning breeze caught her hair as flashbulbs captured images that would appear in newspapers around the world, frozen moments that would never reveal the storm of emotions hidden beneath her calm exterior. The gathered media maintained their respectful distance, their telephoto lenses capturing every gesture and expression for audiences who would see only the polished surface of royal duty. Catherine had perfected the art of public composure over years of practice, but today it felt like wearing armor that was both protective and suffocating. She smiled and waved at the appropriate moments, her training taking over when her heart wanted to collapse. William moved through the final checks and briefings with professional efficiency, shaking hands with officials and receiving last-minute updates from his team. Catherine watched him transform before her eyes from husband and father into the Duke of Cambridge, his public persona sliding into place like a mask he wore to protect both himself and those he loved. The man who had held her through the night was still there, but he was being carefully packaged for public consumption. The children had been positioned at an upstairs window where they could wave goodbye, their faces pressed against the glass in excitement at seeing all the cars and cameras. They had no idea they were witnessing what might be their final goodbye, their innocent joy a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. Catherine waved up at them, her smile genuine for the first time that morning as she drew strength from their trusting faces. The moment of actual departure approached with inexorable certainty, each second ticking away like a countdown to an explosion. Catherine and William had rehearsed this goodbye in their minds countless times, but the reality felt surreal and overwhelming. The cameras captured their final embrace, the kiss they shared, the way they held hands until the very last second. But no lens could penetrate to the desperate love and fear that passed between them in that instant. As William's car door closed, Catherine felt a piece of her soul being ripped away, but her public face never faltered. She continued waving until the motorcade disappeared through the palace gates, her hand moving mechanically, while her mind struggled to process the reality that he was truly gone. The crowd began to disperse, the media packed up their equipment, and the palace staff returned to their duties. But Catherine remained frozen in place. The silence that followed his departure was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the everyday bustle of palace life continuing around her. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow with gentle words about the children's lunch plans and afternoon activities, practical concerns that felt impossibly distant from Catherine's emotional reality. She nodded and responded appropriately while feeling like she was watching someone else live her life. The children's voices echoed from upstairs as they discussed the exciting morning they had witnessed, their chatter about the big cars and important people, a painful reminder of their innocence. Catherine climbed the stairs to join them, each step requiring conscious effort as she prepared to play the role of cheerful mother, while her heart felt like it was bleeding. They would need her to be strong, to maintain their routines, to keep their world stable while their father risked his life for strangers. Lunch proceeded with determined normalcy as Catherine listened to the children's plans for the afternoon and helped them with their schoolwork. George had questions about geography that reminded her of the dangerous places William was traveling to, While Charlotte wanted help with a story about separated families that hit too close to home, Louis simply wanted extra cuddles, his emotional radar picking up on the sadness his mother was trying so hard to hide. The afternoon stretched endlessly as Catherine moved through familiar routines that felt foreign without William's presence. She helped with homework, supervised music practice, and read stories, but part of her attention remained focused on her phone, waiting for the message that would confirm his safe arrival at the first checkpoint. Every minute of silence felt like an eternity. Every unexpected sound made her heart race with hope and terror. As evening approached, Catherine realized she was counting hours since his departure, like a prisoner marking time until freedom. The palace felt different without him, larger and lonelier despite being filled with staff and children and the constant activity of royal life. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, looking up expectantly when doors opened, her body refusing to accept what her mind knew to be true. The bedtime routine that had been so precious the night before now felt like an endurance test as she tried to maintain normal interactions with the children while missing half of their family. She read extra stories and sang additional songs, using these tender moments to pour love into her children while drawing strength from their trust and affection. They were her anchor now, keeping her grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Alone in their bedroom that night, Catherine finally allowed herself to break. The careful composure she had maintained throughout the day crumbled as she sat on William's side of the bed, holding his pillow and breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered in the fabric. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat and the distant chiming of palace clocks marking time she couldn't bear to count. She opened the small package he had given her that morning, her hands shaking as she unwrapped a delicate silver locket. Inside was a photograph of their family taken just weeks earlier, during a private moment in the garden, all four of them laughing at something Louis had done. On the back, William had engraved the words, "Until we meet again," a promise that felt both comforting and terrifyingly uncertain. The weight of the locket around her neck became a physical reminder of everything she was fighting to protect. The letter she had given William seemed inadequate now, words on paper feeling impossibly small compared to the vastness of her love and fear. She wondered if he had read it yet, if her expressions of faith and encouragement had reached him wherever he was in his journey toward danger. The thought of him reading her words alone in some foreign place made her feel both connected to him and heartbreakingly isolated from the reality he was now facing. Her phone remained silent, which could mean anything or nothing. No news was supposed to be good news, but each passing hour without communication felt like a small death, a reminder that he was moving further away from safety and deeper into uncertainty. She found herself checking the device obsessively, willing it to ring with his voice or at least a text message confirming he had reached the first checkpoint safely. The morning brought no relief, only the continuation of a routine that felt hollow, without its most important participant. The children woke asking when Daddy would call, their innocent expectations a reminder that she needed to maintain hope for their sake even when her own faith wavered. Breakfast felt like a performance as she answered their questions with optimism she didn't feel, promising updates and phone calls she wasn't sure would come. Days passed in a blur of normal activities overlaid with constant anxiety. Catherine attended scheduled events and fulfilled her royal obligations, her public appearances seamlessly professional, while her private moments were consumed with worry. The media followed his mission from a distance, reporting on the humanitarian crisis he was addressing, but never revealing the personal cost of his service or the depth of security concerns that surrounded his presence in the region. 3 weeks into his absence, the call finally came. William's voice, crackling through a poor connection, reached across thousands of miles to tell her he was safe, that the mission was succeeding beyond their hopes, and that he would be coming home soon. The sound of his voice broke something open inside her that had been holding her together through sheer willpower, and she sobbed with relief that no one else could hear. The children's excitement was infectious as they counted down the days until his return, their trust vindicated and their faith in their father's invincibility restored. Catherine found herself truly smiling for the first time since his departure, the weight of constant fear finally beginning to lift as the end of their separation became real, instead of just hopeful. When the day of his return finally arrived, The palace courtyard was again filled with cameras and officials, but this time Catherine's performance was genuine. Her smile was real, her excitement authentic, her relief so profound it radiated from every pore. The motorcade that had taken him away returned him to her whole and safe, carrying not just her husband and the children's father, but also the missing piece of her soul that had been traveling with him through danger. Their embrace in front of the cameras captured a moment of joy so pure and raw that it moved millions of viewers around the world. People who had never met them felt the depth of their love, the magnitude of their relief, and the power of a reunion that represented hope, triumphing over fear. The silent farewell had become a triumphant return, proving that sometimes love truly is strong enough to overcome any obstacle, any distance, any danger that threatens to tear it apart.